It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Rico Brogna! How we doing? We're feeling good? We're excited? It's very, 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 very cold out in New York, but there's no but. We're still a month away from spring. We're still a month and a half away from opening day. I'd love to tell you it's about to warm up. It's not about to warm up. I will tell you a positive, though. In just a couple of days, the New York Mets are going to play a baseball game in Port St. Lucie, Florida. I'm going to completely over-exaggerate it, like I'm going to score it. My son is going to score it. I'll probably text Hoffman and say, hey, let's do a Rico. We got to respond to the first ever spring training game. So that's exciting. And then you'll soon realize that that game doesn't count. And nothing we saw in that game actually matters. Carlos Mendoza announced on Wednesday that Clay Holmes is going to make the start in that game. And even if Clay Holmes looks brilliant for 3 innings, that'll be nice. That'll be a nice sign. Let's see some of the pitches he's learning, like that changeup. Let's see if he whips it out, or that cutter. But the reality is we are still a long ways away from the start of the season. But don't worry, we have a lot of Rico Brognas. We will do our 2026 off-season preview edition of the Rico in just a couple of days. I look forward to that just so we can get it out of our system. But today on the Rico Brogna, we are going to listen to Steve Cohen. On Tuesday down in Port St. Lucie, Florida, Steve Cohen met the media. He also did an interview a few days earlier with the great Howie Rose on the Meet at the Apple podcast. So Steve has been active over the last couple of days talking to us. It's not just talking to the media. It's talking to us as Met fans. So as we've done plenty during this offseason, we've done it with Mendy, we've done it with David Stearns, we will now give Steve Cohen the Rico treatment. And what that means is we are going to listen to his entire press conference. We will stop after he gives an answer, and we will analyze it. Now, some of these headlines have come out over the last 2 days. You may be aware of some of the bigger things Steve Cohen said, whether it's about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. or challenging Met fans to show up to the ballpark. But if you haven't heard every second of what Steve Cohen had to say, you'll get a chance to do that here on the Rico, and we will give you our instant analysis. So buckle up, get set. Let's hear from the owner of the New York Mets and his beautiful money, Steve Cohen.
You think of seeing Juan Soto in the orange and blue the other day?
I mean, how great is that, right? I mean, to have him on the team, it'll be exciting to watch him, how he plays. He's so singularly focused on baseball. It'd be great having him in the lineup, right? It's pretty exciting. I think the fans are going to love it.
You think the fans are going to love it? Yeah. We are salivating over every video that comes out of Juan Soto. We see Juan Soto taking batting practice. We're salivating. We see Juan Soto hitting a first pitch pop-up against Edwin Diaz, and we salivate. We see him do the Soto shuffle, and we salivate. So, yes, Steve, we are very excited. I think back to all the free agents, all the acquisitions the Mets have made over their many years, even during the Wilpon era. You know, bringing in Pedro Martinez, bringing in Carlos Beltran, Johan Santana, Francisco Lindor. I think Juan Soto in a lot of ways is the most exciting because I think with a lot of those guys, like with Pedro as an example, I adored Pedro Martinez growing up. I mean, the idea of Pedro being a Met was surreal, but you also knew it was short-lived. You knew it wasn't going to be for a very long time. And who knew at the time if we were going to see Pedro in his prime. And really, we did for basically a year. That was it. We are looking at a 25, 26-year-old generation stud that's ours. So I think we all share that sentiment that Steve Cohen has.
Just seeing all your work and the culmination of that whole free agency period of wooing him, you know, how does it kind of come together when you see him pick up that bat and step in there?
Yeah, I mean, it's always nice when a plan comes together, and the plan came together, and it's exciting to think about having him, but once you see him starting to hit in the cage and looking forward to him to playing games, and I think he's going to create a lot of excitement for the team.
He already has. I mean, you'll hear Steve talk about it later with the ticket sales for 2025. I think he's already created that buzz amongst Met fans, and obviously it's caused some of us, not me, not as much Hoff, but some of us in the Met community to talk down to Yankee fans because we stole Juan Soto from him. So Steve is right. It's created quite a buzz.
You've it's become a running joke, the 3 to 5 year World Series thing. But
Yeah.
at the Soto press conference, you said you had told him you could see the team winning 2 to 4 over the next decade. Why do you think that? Or why are you not afraid to say that out loud?
You always want to set high standards and high goals. There's no guarantee in anything, right? It's really hard to win a World Series, but the thought of we're putting together a team, not just a team good for 1 year, but we want to create sustainable success. And if we keep making the playoffs, why can't we find ultimate, get to the ultimate goal? And so why not set a high goal and try to make it?
It's good to have that goal. He's right about this. We haven't experienced this as Met fans, but making the playoffs every single year at least gives you that shot. Now, it's not a guarantee. You could ask our friends who are Yankee fans. They make the playoffs every single year. They finally got back to a World Series last year. But we as fans have not experienced making the playoffs in 3 straight years. We've only experienced it in back-to-back years twice. So I can't tell you the future. I know that if they continue to spend, develop the right players, which they're trying to do, that we have a shot. But basically, it's make the playoffs every year. If you can make the playoffs every year, you at least give yourself that shot to get hot at the right time. The problem is, and I think the Phillies are actually a good example of this, is early on in their run, their most recent run that they're on, they did get hot, and they got to a World Series. And look what's happened since. They've had better teams since then, but 2023, they're getting knocked out in the NLCS, losing games at home to a team they're better than the Arizona Diamondbacks. Last year, they lose to us, even after winning the division. So it's tough. It's not easy, even if you're there every year, but certainly that's the goal.
This is your 5th team here. How do you feel about this team compared to how you felt at other times in spring?
Yeah, listen, there were other times I felt we've had a pretty good team, and certainly coming out of 22, I thought 23 would be a great team, and it turned out to be different. So you can write it down on paper, but there's no guarantees. And so I always say we got to play the games, and you don't know about injuries, you don't know how people are going to play, but on paper we look like a really strong team with a lot of depth, and I think to get through spring training, 162 games. And playoffs, we're going to need that depth. And so I'm excited by who we have on the team. I think it's a team that is going to produce runs. I think our pitching is going to surprise people. I mean, I know there's a lot of talk about starting pitching. And the other thing is we're flexible. One thing, if we have to make changes or improve the team during the year, we saw what we did in 24, and we'll do it again in 25.
Well, the question I think a lot of us have right now as we sit here midweek of the first full week of spring training is, are you flexible enough to do it right now with your pitching? With this injury to Frankie Montas and Jose Quintana still being out there, do the Mets say, hey, we've been talking about our pitching depth all winter. Let's ride with that. Let's trust Griffin Canning. Let's trust Tyler McGill. Let's trust Paul Blackburn. Or does Steve Cohen make that pivot and spend even more money to bring back Jose Quintana, who, according to Pat Ragazzo, the Mets have a mutual interest in? I'd love if they added Quintana. These financial debates are so fascinating because there's no salary cap in baseball. There's a tax, and the Mets are already paying that tax. So any move they make is just about a willingness from the owner to spend even more money, and he's already spent a fortune. If he's willing to spend whatever Quintana's cost plus the 110%, I don't know why anybody would be against it. Like, it's not blocking Brandon Sproat. Brandon Sproat's not ready. When Brandon Sproat is ready, he will pitch. I can promise you that. We saw that last year with Christian Scott. When Blade Tidwell is ready to pitch at the major league level, he will pitch. So really, it's just resupplying depth because they had a spring injury to Frankie Montas. So when Steve talks about, hey, look at last year, we were ready to make moves, I wonder if that includes Jose Quintana. Stay tuned.
Steve, with the learning curve that you've had as an owner since you bought the team, obviously being kind of new to the game, is this year kind of the first year that you've got almost everything where you want? In Stearns, you have the president of baseball operations you want. You're getting the star power roster that you probably always imagined. Is this kind of it, really the first year it's all come together in that way? And even where you at, where you're at on the learning curve for that too.
Yeah, I think on paper we look really good. I think from a management point of view, where we have a group that's going to be together for a while, and I think having that type of stability is really important. But we still have to play the games, and we still have a ways to go for as infrastructure. I think we've moved things along a lot, but I always believe in innovating and never accepting a certain, always trying to push it further. And that's going to be the philosophy of the team. I mean, we're going to try to make all aspects of the club, the infrastructure, elite. And those are my goals, and I tend to have high goals.
We're already seeing that. I mean, with the pitching lab that got rave reviews based on the performance from last year, hearing about the hitting lab that they've added, this is no longer a franchise that's in the Stone Age. And as far as stability is concerned, because we have been thirsty for that. And the first part of Steve Cohen's era, not all his fault, but certainly some of it his fault, this team lacked stability. He takes over, he hires Sandy Alderson, and then we see the cavalcade of general managers that got into some kind of trouble, whether it was Zach Scott or Jared Porter for different reasons. They're both gone. And then even Billy Epler, when he was around, it always felt temporary. It always felt like they were looking, or Steve was looking for someone else, specifically David Stearns. We'd heard David's name for many years and his connection as growing up in Manhattan and being a Met fan. Right now, as we begin year 2 of David Stearns, there is a stability. You look at David Stearns and this guy's going to run the Mets for a decade, maybe more, right? So I think that part is exciting, that this front office, which had so much movement early on, it was tough to really be that confident when you saw Sandy and Porter and Scott and Epler, and it's like, my God, there is a great amount of stability as we enter year 2 of David Stearns.
What would make this year a success in your eyes?
No, we got to make the playoffs. Okay, that's the minimum. After getting a taste of being in the league championship, we want to go to the World Series, right? And we want to win. And if we put ourselves in that position enough, maybe it doesn't happen this year, maybe it does. But if we keep putting ourselves in position in the playoffs and to make a deep run, we're going to win a World Series at some point.
That is the $1 million question we have as fans going into a season. What is an acceptable year? Now, I'm old enough, I think a lot of us are, is unless you're, I guess, over the age of 50 or 48, you remember 1986, anyone under that number, well, I guess 45 maybe is the cutoff, 47, whatever it is. If you don't have a World Series, we're sick of waiting. Even if you are over that age, you're sick of waiting because you remember 1986, it was a long time ago. So I think I go into every season as a sports fan as I get older saying, you better win it all. Because as sports fans, as Met fans, we've seen it all. We've seen the Mets go to a World Series, even relatively recently, if you want to call 10 years ago recently. I'm lucky enough that I've seen them do it twice, including 2000. We've seen them get to an NLCS. That was a year ago. We've seen them make the playoffs. So we've seen it all except a championship. But the reason I don't subscribe to it's championship or bust, I mean, I'll be disappointed if this season ends, whether it's after 162 games not making the playoffs or losing in the first round, the second round, or dare I say the World Series. I'll always be disappointed. But if I'm being realistic, Steve is right that the bare minimum is making the playoffs. In this world we live in this format we live in, with all the money that's been spent, with the promise on this roster, I will declare this to you today, whenever you're listening, February 19th, February 20th, February 21st. If the Mets don't make the playoffs, this season was a disaster. Very simple. Once you get to the playoffs, and we saw the good end of it last year, it's just about getting hot at the right time. So while I'll be very disappointed if the season ends in the division series or the wild card series or even in the NLCS again, I also know, and I could say this now in the middle of February without the pressures of postseason baseball, that make the playoffs and hope you get lucky. That's unfortunately the world we live in. Look at the Dodgers. Look at the amount of 100-plus win seasons they had prior to winning the World Series last year, where they make the playoffs. They have a great regular season, and they get tripped up in the DS. So I can't say into a microphone, if I'm being honest, without the emotions pumping through my brain in the middle of February, that if they don't win the World Series, the season's a disaster. Maybe I'll get to that someday. Maybe that's something we're talking about, Rico 26 or Rico 2027. But as we enter 2025, make the playoffs. I agree with that. Make the playoffs every single year. And logic would tell you, or at least we'd hope, that you'll get hot at the right time. But it's a great question. And I think we as Met fans can now discuss that amongst ourselves. What is an acceptable season? Making the playoffs is acceptable. Doesn't mean it's great. Doesn't mean they make the playoffs, they get knocked out. It was a wonderful season. I didn't say that. Acceptable. And anything short of making the postseason would be a disaster. In terms of the division versus the wild card, I had this chat recently with a buddy of mine who's a Yankee fan, and he was telling me, who cares if you win the division? Doesn't matter. I can't say that. We will be sitting here if the Mets are in a pennant race, and I will be banging the drum on why winning the division matters. And you want to know why it matters? It's kind of simple, a little simple math. If you can win the division and finish with a top 2 record in this league, you do not deal with a wild card series. You don't deal with it. So there's no risk of losing because you're automatically in the division series. I'm sorry. I don't care what the history of the last few years shows. I'd rather skip around. I would. I'd rather not deal with the wild card series. Now, we get to the final week of the season. Is it the end-all, be-all to win the division? It's not the end-all, be-all. The Mets just showed you they can win a wild card, even the third wild card spot, and go on a run to the NLCS. But I would rather, I think this is open and shut, I'd rather win a division than be the third wild card. Anyhow, let's get back to our fine owner, Steve Cohen.
Steve, you had a lot of unsung heroes last year that helped you guys get to 2 wins away from the World Series. Jose Iglesias was one of them. Just what are your thoughts on the situation? I mean, he's obviously not here, but you have brought a lot of back guys from last year, kind of keeping the chemistry going and whatnot. So just interested to hear what you have to say for that.
Yeah, listen, every year there's always new players on a team, and chemistry, happens. Doesn't just happen walking into spring training. It takes a while for the team to gel. And listen, as far as individual players, I leave it to my baseball people to decide who they want on the team.
I believe that. There are still some Met fans, maybe some of you guys listening right now, that doesn't believe that Steve Cohen actually allows the baseball people like David Stearns to make these decisions. I think he does, even in the case of Pete Alonso. As much as he may like Pete, as much as he's the homegrown New York Met, I think ultimately David Stearns makes these decisions. I think when you're in a high-level negotiation, Steve will get involved, as we saw, in negotiating with Scott Boras. So I think the same is the case with Jose Iglesias. As much of a fun impact as he made on last year's team, and it was more than just being fun, he obviously performed at a very high level. I believe Steve Cohen when he says, I leave that to my baseball people. That is literally up to the baseball people.
I know that you last episode you grilled me about do I take it back with David Stearns and Pete and with the whole Pete Alonso stuff, and I will say this much: I am accepting the fact that I am wrong about this year. David Stearns did want him back for this year. There's no doubt about that. So I will take the L on that
for this season. I agree with you. I mean, he didn't offer him a 5-year contract, so I'm not arguing about next year. And I love that Pete said, I'll take the L on that one. Here on the Rico, we don't have L's that one can wear. We do that on Evan and Tiki, and that's being worn by Sean Morash for the next week and a half. But if we ever developed a Rico L, yes, Pete, I appreciate your humbleness. You'd have to wear the L.
Not a problem.
All right, back to the owner of the Mets, Steve Cohen.
Steve, you mentioned something like infrastructure. Yeah. Can you talk about some stuff you think you still have to close the gap on? You at your introductory press conference, you talked about like the Dodgers, where it's kind of humming on all facets. What do you think you have to close the gap still on to hum on all facets?
Yeah, listen, I'm not familiar with exactly, it looks like the Dodgers are humming, but hard to know from the outside looking in. I mean, I'm sure all organizations have stuff they have to work on. I think, I want to be a team that can improve players. And I think we're, from a pitching perspective, we've been able to do that. And I still think we're trying to figure it out from a hitting perspective. And so, and I think you and I've had conversations in the past where everyone's working on pitching, and everybody thinks they can improve pitching. But if we can do that, then I think that would be a real leap forward. And so that would be an exciting prospect. We're always trying to improve the technology of the infrastructure, and if we can find new ways to deploy technology in innovative ways, maybe using AI and machine learning in new ways, that would be kind of exciting. So there's always something to do, and I leave it to the baseball people to come to me and with the type of things they want to work on.
It's tough to jump to too many conclusions off of one season. I think you need a sample size of multiple seasons. He talked about guys come here and they improve. We saw that last year when it came to the pitching. It's part of why this team had the success that they had. And that's why when they made moves during the offseason, like signing Frankie Montas or signing Clay Holmes and converting him into a starter, or even Griffin Canning, who made 31 starts last year to a 5 ERA, a lot of us are like, okay, heat check time. You guys got the pitching lab. You improved guys last year. Luis Severino, and I know a lot of it was just staying healthy, but he was the worst pitcher in baseball with the Yankees a year prior. The worst. And the Mets turned him into a very good quality middle to front end of the rotation arm. Growing up, Leo Mazzoni was that. Like Jarrett Wright was broken. He went to Atlanta. They fixed him. Dave Duncan had that in St. Louis as well. Houston had that. Think about what we always talk about the Astros and the buzzers and the banging of the drums, the garbage cans, that is. The truth is, what was Justin Verlander before he went to Houston? What was Ryan Presley before he went to Houston? Like, they fixed pitchers. And I'm not implying that they cheated by any stretch on that, though they may have. You never know. But they got guys to improve. And so if that's something that becomes legit, like they build off of the fixes that they had last year, and that continues this year, the year after that, that's great on so many levels. Not only does it give you a great chance to win, but it allows you to not spend ridiculous money on starting pitching when there's so much risk attached to it. Go bring a guy in on a 1-year, 2-year deal, and we'll fix him. And you notice the amount of pitchers who wanted to come back. Luis Severino wanted to come back. Sean Manaea was turning down money. He wanted to come back. Even Jose Quintana still wants to come back. So clearly, in the early going, the returns are strong on that goal Steve Cohen set. Now, can they do that with offense? We'll see. Can Jeff McNeil have a renaissance this year? That would be pretty big, especially considering he's making $15.5 million and is the everyday second baseman. That would be big. So we'll see if that is a trend that can continue with the pitching and now start to become a thing with the hitting lab.
Is there any level of frustration that you weren't able to get under that $301 million?
I mean, I wouldn't say frustrating, but I mean, it always seems like ball players are more expensive than you think. And so, it comes back to, I think, ultimately having a farm system that is producing players, because obviously they're controllable, they're cheaper, and you need a mix. And I think we're going to get there, and I hope we get there soon. If we get there, I think that really makes it easier to kind of get to probably a more normal spending level.
It's not full because they have a high payroll and they have a payroll above $300 million. But I want to take everybody back a year ago as we were entering the 2024 season, a year that was called an evaluation season. We thought, all right, Brett Beatty's going to fail at third base. Mark Vientos is going to fail at third base. And so next year, this year that we're talking about, the Mets are going to have to go get a third baseman. But because Mark Vientos developed, we never talked about adding a third baseman unless it was under the guise of replacing Pete Alonso. So he's right. If the Mets can have young players step up, and I know for a lot of people, you don't want to trust someone who hasn't done it yet. Like if the Mets came into the start of the season and said, all right, Brett Beatty, you're getting the bulk of the at-bats at first base. Of course, most of us would have cringed and said, we don't trust. But if a guy performs and gives you that sign, you could have even more confidence to go into a season and not have to spend big money to sign a player to play that position. I'll give you a couple of great examples, and we'll spend more time on this when we preview 2026. If Brandon Sproat comes up in the middle of July and is awesome, and let's say Blade Tidwell comes up in the middle of July and pitches well, and Christian Scott's on his way back, we may be sitting here next year saying, we don't need to add any starting pitching. Kodai was good. David Peterson was good. And oh, by the way, these young arms pitched well. We could be sitting here basically saying, what the hell do we need to add starting pitching for? Same thing with a bat. What if Luis Angel Acuna Jr. gets it? Luis Angel Acuna comes up and performs at a high level. And all of a sudden, we're screaming and yelling going into the offseason. We don't need Jeff McNeil. Dump the $15 million. Oh, by the way, Jet Williams came up and was contributing. Make him the center fielder. Young players performing is how you save money. He's right. Young players performing and you not needing to go out and buy a free agent. Like the reason we scream at times, because I'm not always wanting a free agent. It depends who it is, depends the situation, is when there's a clear vacancy. Young players perform and there aren't vacancies. You don't have to spend as much money. Simple as that. Last year was a great year in terms of the Mets' success. It was not a great year in terms of some of the young players coming up and declaring themselves. Drew Gilbert never got here. Jet Williams never got here. Acuna did, but not declared himself enough with enough time to really say, hey, he's an everyday player. Ronnie Mauricio had a lost season because of the torn ACL. And even Christian Scott. Like, this offseason could have been different if Christian Scott was healthy last year. Could have been. Maybe they don't sign Frankie Montas. Maybe they don't sign Clay. I don't know. Maybe they sign one less pitcher thinking Christian Scott's part of the mix. So the key to not spending money, and it's not about being cheap, it's about being smart, is having the young guys develop.
The toughest part for you, the penalties or the draft pick? Well, I mean, the draft pick is part of the penalty, but the financial penalties or the drafting lower.
So nobody wants to spend money and pay tax, right? I mean, those are expensive taxes. And so, obviously, but also, I mean, that is a losing draft position and or draft picks at some, is an expense. You don't see it on the bottom line, but it's an expense. And both are probably not optimal as far as trying to run a team.
The answer is all of the above, Puma. All right. He doesn't want to pay a tax. No one wants to pay a tax, especially like sometimes, not to give you a statement on government, but when we pay taxes, part of the frustration is that our local government and our federal government spends it horribly. They waste it. Like, I'd pay taxes and I'd be okay paying taxes if I knew it was going to be spent wisely. It never has, right? Well, in baseball, where does that money on the tax Steve Cohen pays? It goes to small market teams who pocket it. It's not as if they're reinvesting it. They're literally pocketing it. So I think we could all understand as good tax-paying Americans why Steve Cohen doesn't want to pay the tax in an ideal world.
This year, payroll-wise, you guys are at about 325 according to some of the public estimates. How does that compare to what you thought at the end of last season?
Well, let me put it different. I mean, I've always wanted to be a little more measured in payroll growth, and then we get there, and it's never quite there. I mean, I have the ability to spend if I have to, and I want to win, and I want to put the best team I can on the field, and so. But I mean, there's certain things I mean. Getting free agency is expensive. It's just the way it is, and it's always more expensive than you can imagine.
So I was sitting on my couch on Tuesday. I didn't know Steve Cohen was meeting the media, and I got a text message from Pete Hoffman, and he wrote, "I love Steve Cohen." And I didn't know what he meant. I quickly realized, Steve's doing a press conference. So I, very quickly rewound it on YouTube, listen to the whole thing, which we're doing right now. I believe, and Hoff is the only one that can answer this, I believe Hoff's "I love Steve Cohen" text message was because of that clip he just played. the clip of I can spend if I have to. Am I correct or wrong that was what caused you to say, quote, I love Steve Cohen?
My heart melted inside when he said that. I couldn't believe it. I just it gave me chills that I've never had before. Even when I saw my firstborn son, it just doesn't, the Steve Cohen, when he speaks, it hits me, man. It really, truly does. So I love this man.
Well, that line is special, especially all of us who lived in the Wilpon era. To hear an owner say, hey, listen, if I got to spend, I'll spend. And obviously he has. I mean, this is a very, very high payroll, whether they win a championship or not this season. So I guess I was right. That was the line that really got you.
Yeah, no. And here's the thing, though. We've been waiting for an owner like this. And it's not. Not every team gets to experience it. And again, it doesn't mean anything if the Mets don't win. The problem is Steve Cohen has that cutthroat mentality. He's going to win. It's going to happen. So just get ready for the ride. And for all the naysaying I've had in the past 5 years, I'm sorry.
Look, the biggest naysay I had, and I have no problem apologizing, was, is he just a caricature of what we thought he was? Go out, target a free agent, overspend if you have to, and go get him. Remember a year ago with Shohei Ohtani, even Yoshinobu Yamamoto. My point was, hey, if you really wanted him, you should have been higher. You should have at least tried to get Ohtani. He did that with Juan Soto. That was the moment. That was the moment of, because he had high payrolls before that. I'm not saying he didn't, but to go out and basically make it clear, I will not be outbid for this player. He's got my trust for a while. I'm going to promise you, when it comes to money and Steve Cohen, I'm probably going to be more on his side now than I would have been. Because a year ago, I was critical of him. I wasn't fully buying it. You know what? If you are different, if you are the owner we think you are, go out and leave no doubt. And he did it with Juan Soto. So I don't take an L. I just say thank you. You did what I think we needed to see.
So you're saying if Vlad Guerrero Jr. he doesn't get next year, you're going to give him a pass?
I have a lot to say about Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and I'm not sure most of the audience will agree with me. But we'll get to that in a little bit. We'll do a little bit of it today because Steve's going to be asked about Vlad, and we'll do a lot more of it when we do our 2026 off-season preview, which we will be posting in just a couple of days. I promise you. We want to get it out of the way in February of 2025. Anyhow, here's more from Steve Cohen.
You say get the spending down to a more reasonable level when you start to use the farm system in the ways that you want. What is a reasonable level?
I mean, I'd like to get below the Cohen tax. Whatever. I'm sure it's about me. There's a lot of Cohens out there. I mean, I was saying to somebody before, I'm a piker now compared to the Dodgers.
He's got a sense of humor. It is a great question. Look, Halas said that a lot too with the Yankees. I'd like to be below that tax. Doesn't mean you will. The results of this year, the way guys play, I talked about the younger players, that will tell us if he will ever be able to get under that aptly named Cohen tax.
You mentioned the Dodgers. Al Steinbrenner recently said that it's hard for us owners, most of us owners, to keep up with that. How do you view what the Dodgers are doing? Do you think that's what they're doing is bad for the sport?
Well, I'm not going to get into whether something's bad or good. They've built a great business over there with revenues that are significantly above almost any other team. And that gives them the ability to do things that perhaps other teams can't do. And so kudos to them. I mean, they've built a great organization.
We are hypocrites if we hate the Dodgers. We can't sit here and wax poetic about our owners spending billions and then be bitter about what the Dodgers are doing. But Steve will be asked a little bit more about what the Dodgers are doing.
Well, when you take a look at the business side of your day job compared to this side, this baseball seems every year to rapidly change. Have you seen the differences in baseball since you've been here and how rapid the changes to the landscape are?
Have you ever traded markets before? They change pretty rapidly, too. So I'm actually there's a lot of similarities between being in the markets, running a hedge fund, and running a team. And a lot of it has to do that things change pretty quickly, or you have to have, pretty flexible thinking. How you think, what's happening, you have to be really adaptable when things are changing. And so there are a lot of similarities there, and I'm kind of used to doing it.
I'm trying to think what has really changed since Steve bought the team. Probably the new CBA, the labor dispute, which led to the Cohen tax and some of the newer rules. But outside of that, I don't think that much has changed in the last couple of years.
What you think about some of the deferred money that the Dodgers and some other teams, do you see that being a trend? How do you feel about that? That doesn't seem to be how you guys are operating.
I love deferring money if I can. Okay, it just so happens my players, I'm not getting lucky enough to. But I think that's a little bit of a red herring, and because they're also giving big signing bonuses too. And I think what's really happening there is they're trying to balance out the signing bonus with the deferral. If you notice, they tend to be in the same ballpark. And so I think people are focused on deferral and maybe not thinking about the fact that they're advancing cash at the beginning. So I'm not sure that's a real issue.
I agree with Steve. I think sometimes we cry about it. The only deferral that the Dodgers made that feels wrong and it feels like it needs to be fixed was the Ohtani stuff. Only because, you give a big signing bonus, you defer money, you could try as much as you want to try. The CBT number is still going to be high. You can't manipulate it that much. In the case of Shohei Ohtani, they are paying him $70 million a season, even though they're not paying him $70 million a season because he deferred basically all of it. The CBT is still a high number. It's in the 40s, but it doesn't feel legitimate. That's the one that I would kind of look at and say, come on. That's a little ridiculous. Now, they will pay the piper at some point. Now, we don't know what baseball's rules are going to be 15, 20 years from now, but in theory, they're going to have a CBT on the books for Shohei Ohtani when he's 50 years old and he's not playing baseball anymore. But I agree with Steve. I think we don't like the Dodgers, and we shouldn't like the Dodgers. The Dodgers are the big evil of 2025. No doubt. They're the team we couldn't get past. They are the team that we're going to probably have to get past. Or maybe someone else will do the dirty work for us, like the Cardinals did in 2000 with Atlanta. But they're really not doing anything wrong. And Steve took a little tiny shot at his own players by saying, hey, I'd love to defer. None of my guys want to do it. Go ask Scott Boras and Juan Soto why they wouldn't defer a freaking dime. Well, I'm sure they deferred a dime, but not enough. He'd be doing deferrals if players are okay with it. And unfortunately, the Mets haven't run into the players that are okay with the deferrals.
Steve, you mentioned both doing what is necessary to win and trying to lower the number below the Cohen threshold.
Right. Yeah.
Does wanting to win again this year if more stuff comes from your baseball people that they want to do?
Well,
if it means expanding your payroll further.
We're pretty up there. We're at 325, and we're not including IL placements and then bringing up minor league players, and there's that adds to the payroll, and then obviously we want to reserve some money for the trade deadline. And so already I can envision if things go probably the way they're going to go, it could easily be 340, 345. That's a pretty hefty payroll.
Oh, no doubt. No question about it. I think it depends on the opportunity. Steve Cohen has already shown us he's willing to go above that. He may even go above that number. Let's see who's available at the trade deadline and if it makes sense for us. But I don't think there's any question. He has clearly shown a willingness to bring that number up even more. And as he said in that answer, come the trade deadline, if we're fortunate enough to be in a pennant race, that number probably does go up more. Could go up more soon if they actually want to sign Jose Quintana.
Yeah. How long is that sustainable for you? If this doesn't go the way you want it to go, how many years can you continue doing that?
It's really hard to look out into the future, hard to know. I take it year to year. I can finance it. Is that the most optimal way to run a team? Probably not.
So the answer to that is I got the money. I can do this forever. I don't want to do it forever. I don't want to have a $350 million payroll every single season, but I have the money to do it. It's not like this is going to be a Wilpon scenario where they're calling up Bill Maher and Anthony Scaramucci to buy 2% of the team just so they can raise some funds. He can do it. It's a willingness to do it. And that's important, as you'll hear as this continues.
So it's the difference between can, which isn't a question,
right,
and want to.
Well, I wrestle with that all the time. Even this year, I had a thought of like where I wanted to be, and I've already blown through it. And so, and I really wanted to be there, and just circumstances just created all right, I'm going to have to adapt my thinking.
Where was that?
And, well, I'm not going to say what it was, but, but I mean, it seems like when you really get to the end, it's just that, I'll say it again, free agency is a lot more expensive than even you planned for that year.
Yeah. I think the number he probably wanted was the Cohen tax. He answered that earlier. He'd like to be under that number. Well, when you're giving Juan Soto $50+ million a year, you address the pitching, which they did relatively early on, especially with Frankie Montas and Clay Holmes. And you wanted to bring back Pete Alonso, which was clear, and you knew it was going to be expensive. It adds up real quick. David Stearns had mentioned this when we were listening to his answers last week, that they had different kind of looks of where that payroll would end up, and it ended up higher than they thought. Yeah, it did. I think signing Juan Soto had a lot to do with it. If they had missed out on Juan Soto, I think their payroll clearly would have been lower. They would have been more aggressive. Like maybe they're in on a guy like Alex Bregman, who knows, and Pete Alonso and Vientos. God knows what they would have done. But the starting point is once you add Soto to that mix, yeah, the payroll was probably going to explode a little higher than Steve had thought.
Why did you ultimately decide to blow through it?
Listen, I want a winning team, and I want to put the best team I can on the field, and the way it went was, it just turned out that's hard to know what pitchers you're going to sign, hard to know what position players you're going to sign, and you try to be somewhat measured, but in the end, you have to make decisions, and it's just sort of the way it ends up playing out. And I still say it comes back to ultimately having a farm system that's producing players that can moderate the payroll.
He's right, man. Comes back to that. Once they they are doing it a little bit. I mentioned Vientos as an example of this, where if they didn't have a third baseman, they would have looked at their payroll would have been higher. If Vientos never developed, and let's say the Mets still had similar success to last year, but there was no opening at third, I don't know. They probably spend a few more dollars to add another reliable bat.
Was Pete part of that initial projection, or did that kind of become an add-on?
I don't remember exactly. I mean, we always thought that Pete would be part of the team.
Okay.
And then, obviously there were moments during that when we thought maybe he wasn't going to be part of the team, right? He was maybe considering going to other places. Mm-hmm. And then the question is, well, who would you replace him with? And depending if you signed him or didn't sign him, actually would have a reasonable effect on what the ultimate payroll would be.
That's interesting. The way he phrases the Alonso thing is never, we were pivoting away from him. It's more, we thought he was pivoting away from us. We thought he was signing with another team, but we always wanted him back, and he was always a part of the plan.
What is what's the state of the Willets Point project that you're trying to get done?
Yeah, we're trying to move it forward. This is an important year. We got to get the property rezoned, and I mean, that's a state legislature issue, and I'm hopeful that we can somehow get it rezoned. If it isn't rezoned, then obviously that would be a problem. And then once we get it rezoned, if we get it rezoned, then we have to win the license. So it's a two-step process. All that's probably going to happen in the next year, and we'll see what happens.
Play another one on this, because I think he's going to be asked more about this project, and then we'll give you some thoughts.
Do you move forward with that if you don't get the license, or is it all in or nothing?
Yeah, I think we need an economic engine to make that work. I mean, you've got to take the parking lot, build parking garages, and that's wildly expensive. You have to, and then the ground that we're building on, you need tons of pylons and that's really expensive. It's an expensive piece of property to build on, and it really needs an economic engine. And without it, it would be impossible to make any economic sense of it.
All right, so I want to make this, or try to help me out on this off. That's him saying if they do not get the license for the casino, this is not happening. That's how I took his answer there, that's the economic engine. And if they don't get the license, I think they will, but let's say they don't, then none of this is happening.
Well, right. But first, before they even get the license, they need the zoning.
Right. That's step one to this whole thing, because I wasn't sure, like, if they didn't get the casino license, would he still, knowing a soccer stadium is being built, there's a baseball stadium, still attempt to put up the parks, the restaurants, everything else that could kind of bloom that area, an area that's been dead since the Mets moved there in 1964. Let's be perfectly honest. They built the World's Fair. Shea Stadium is built. And ever since I was a kid, there's nothing around there. There's never been anything around there. Of course, they built Citi Field. We all say the same thing for the last 15 years. There's nothing around there. Steve's like, hey, I can really change this area for the good, which could lead to better attendance. If the area around Citi Field is jumping with bars and nightclubs and God knows what else, maybe then Friday night out is more appealing to the wife and the husband. And they're like, yeah, we'll go out to Citi Field. Why not? But I just want to make clear that what he said in that is if they don't get the license, we're basically going to be looking at chop shops for the next, 30 years. Really.
Right. But I will tell you this much, and I know that Steve Cohen's not listening to me talk on this podcast. He listens to you. But if he does want to take a listen, when I went to Dallas and Jerry's World and the Rangers Park was there too, there was no casino there. Like I didn't see a casino there. But there was an awesome sports bar. There was awesome. It was just a great area in general. There was plenty of hotels. There's plenty of things going on. I think you could still have a successful area over there.
The worry I would have, and I'm certainly no expert on this, is that who's going there when it's not baseball season if there isn't a casino? Like, that all sounds great on a beautiful July night, but what about November, December, January, February, March? Who's going to be there? If there's a casino there, and we know how popular casinos can be, then it doesn't matter what time of year it is, the place will be jumping. So my guess is that's probably one of the big concerns around it. Like, what does that area look like when it's not baseball season? But we'll see. I think that it will eventually happen. But if it does happen, let's also remember how long it's going to take for it to be built. And also, not that this is a reason for it not to happen. And we've talked about this, I think, about a year ago on the Rico. The time of them building it is going to be hell for us as Met fans, because there's going to be construction. There's going to be extra traffic. There's probably going to be parking issues. But I would equate it to a pregnancy. My wife did not like being pregnant. She was uncomfortable. She was not feeling good. But when the baby's born, it's all worth it. You look at that baby's eyes and it's like, man, those 9 months, that was all worth it. That would be like the construction issues at Citi Field. It would suck for 5 or 6 years, but boy, when that baby comes out and that casino and that restaurant is there, wasn't it all worth it?
Yeah, but the problem is with the pregnancy, like you said, is 9 months. This is 5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a long time to go through a pregnancy.
Yeah. I don't know if it's 5 years. I may be exaggerating, but it's years. Put it that way. It ain't going to take 5 minutes. Anyhow, let's get back to Steve Cohen.
Steve, I believe at the last owners meeting, you were put on the executive, named to the executive council. Yes. A big issue over the next 24 months is going to be, are the owners going for a salary cap or not? Do you think you need a salary cap?
It's 2025. I mean, I'm kind of focused on 2025. A lot can happen between now and then. And as I get up to speed, I'll know more, and I'm not really worrying about it right now.
That's called punting an answer. That's called Steve saying, I may tick people off with some of my answers, but when it comes to the CBA and being on the executive committee, and if we're going to push a salary cap on the players, which is never going to happen, there's never going to be a salary cap in baseball. And the more the owners push it, the greater chance there is for there to be a work stoppage. That was Steve Cohen's way of saying, I'm not getting involved. So I'm going to just say, I don't know, I'm focused on this year. Let's not talk about this, please.
Do you think it would take away a large advantage that you currently have if that came along?
I'll compete under any circumstance. I mean, you tell me the rules and I'll compete against them.
Great answer. Great answer. And if we ever did have a salary cap in this fictitious world where there is one, I'd assume it'd be a soft cap. So you would still get financial advantages, kind of like in the NBA where there are teams that don't want to pay the luxury tax. See the Oklahoma City Thunder. And then there are teams that pay historic luxury taxes. See the Golden State Warriors. But there will never be, I'll make you this long-term prediction. There will never be a salary cap in Major League Baseball, ever.
What did you make of where the Mets ranked as far as attendance last year?
Yeah, I didn't like it. Okay, that really bothered me. 18th in attendance when we're right in the middle of a pennant race. I've said this before. The series against the Nationals, right before the final Philly series, I think there were 18,000 fans in the stadium during a great pennant race. And so I'm really hopeful this year. I mean, I'm told that usually attendance lags performance. And so I'm really looking forward to this year being a year when the fans come out. I think the fans are having a great time. I mean, when I look out on the stadium, I think it's a great game presentation. We have a great team, I think. I'm really excited by. I think it's going to be a fun place to be this year.
This is not the first time Steve Cohen has complained about the Mets attendance. Coming up in a little bit, I'll show you more examples of Steve not being happy about it and why I think it should concern everybody as a Met fan. But let's hear more from Steve Cohen.
Is that part of the thinking with Soto? I mean, not just that he's a great player that's going to help the team win, but he also brings a drawing card to the
Yeah, I would call it a secondary consideration. And when you get a chance to get a generational ball player like that, they don't grow on trees. And when you actually looked at it, it might have been a while before someone of that caliber would be available again. And so that's a pretty rare opportunity. And so that's why I thought it was important to try to give the best effort we could to get him.
Soto will add to the Mets attendance. I don't think it would add to the point of it being worth $50 million a year. The value in Soto, as Steve laid out, is his youth and is the uniqueness of a player with that kind of talent at that kind of age becoming available. But there's no doubt. Off of a good year, the Mets attendance would spike. So whether there was Soto or not, the attendance would be up. And there's no way to completely measure this, but their attendance is up even more because of the excitement around an electric player like Juan Soto.
Well, Vlad Guerrero Jr. turned down the extension for the Blue Jays, and he'll be available next offseason.
Yeah, he's a great ball player, and once again, I'll worry about that next year. Obviously with payroll considerations, and you really can't have. I mean, you can't have too many long-term contracts because then you lose your roster flexibility. So you got to be really careful. But I'll let my baseball people make that decision.
There's a lot there. First of all, I think giving any kind of answer around Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is not good. You're not supposed to talk about another player on a different team. But then he gives you the, hey, how many long-term contracts do you want? And then he gives you that's up to the baseball people. So he gave you the full gamut on Vladimir Guerrero Jr. We'll get to him in a little bit, I promise.
You mentioned that you were, disappointed in the attendance towards the end of the season. What do you attribute that to? Not your disappointment.
That people didn't show up. I mean, I can't speak for why that is, and I think it has a lot to do with generally attendance lags performance, and I think there's always been a little bit of skepticism with the Mets and believing that we're going to be sustainable winners, sustainably in the playoffs. And I think I said it in the clubhouse in a celebration. I think Met fans have had this negative perception of the Mets and their fandom. And one of my goals is to break that negativity and have them believe that we're going to be a sustainable winner year in and year out, and they come to the ballpark and enjoy it.
So there's a bunch of reasons why the Mets didn't draw well. Number one, Steve Cohen, I think you should be aware of this, self-aware of this. You raised ticket prices coming off a year in which you missed the playoffs and you sold off players, okay? That's what happened from 23 into 24. You raised ticket prices. That's number one. I know the ballpark had a lot of great new additions. I get it. A lot of high-end new additions. But a lot of tickets were raised. That's a tough sell when you're coming off a bad year. It's also a tough sell when, while I appreciated what you did, looking at what you did, I didn't know if I appreciated it at the time, but spending the kind of money on buying off the Scherzer and Verlander contract to get prospects, wonderful. But that's a tough sell in the short term because Justin Verlander was no longer on the team. Max Scherzer was no longer on the team, and the Mets had an absolutely painful to watch final 2 months of 2023. You then had an offseason, which at the time did not inspire. It didn't. People weren't inspired by Luis Severino and Sean Manaea. They weren't. They may have been wrong, but they weren't inspired. They came into the season with very limited expectations. You can't expect Met fans, when you raise ticket prices, to go out of their way to buy games in April, May, June, July, August, even September. Where I'll agree with Steve. Here's where I'll agree with him. That Washington series, those first 2 days, it was not good. And there were some games in August where you looked around and said, where are the people? Why haven't you bought in yet? The Mets are clearly in a pennant race right now. But it is true, and I've said this a lot as well, attendance lags behind performance. The Mets drew better in 87 than they did 86. The Mets drew better in 07 than 06. That's just the name of the game. So that's the answer for why they didn't draw well. The only area where I'll agree with Steve is, yes, at the end of the year when they were in a pennant race, it was weird to look around and see a lot of empty seats. But let's have the self-awareness that if you're trying to define why attendance wasn't good in 24, forget 25. I don't think there are many excuses for 25. In 24, you raised prices and the team wasn't supposed to be good. And by the way, for anyone offended by me saying there were no excuses in 2025, I'm not looking at each individual. Obviously, going to games is expensive. You don't have to go to games. But the Yankees do very well, and they charge higher prices. So I can't, as a generality, say next year with the Mets having high expectations, or this year that is, that prices are the reason why they're not drawing well when the team across town draws well. But they need to have sustained success. And hopefully this year kind of begins, or at least continues, that process of having Met fans trust that the success isn't fleeting and going to go away.
Given the offseason you just had, have you seen ticket sales increase compared to maybe what they were the last few years at this time of year?
I missed that. What was that?
Given the offseason that you guys just had, have you seen an increase in ticket sales compared to maybe what was the last few years?
We've seen a decent, significant percentage increase. That's really encouraging. It's what I was hoping for. And frankly, you want a full stadium because, you want a lot of noise there, and you want the opposing teams to really feel it when, they're playing us. And so it's important that the fans come out and support the team.
He didn't really give an answer. He said it's a decent, significant increase. Decent and significant are not the same words. So I don't know. I guess we'll find out when the season starts how the attendance figures are.
Steve, you seem to have a lot of fun personally with last year's run.
Yes.
Getting as far as you guys did. Whenever you start thinking about the business sense of what you're doing, does that pop in your head and like, you know what? I'm going to go beyond what I thought the financial limits were because I want that feeling again for me. I want it for the team. Does that still sit in the back of your mind?
When you go through what that playoff run and the to make the playoffs, I mean, how much fun was that? I mean, that month was one of the months I hadn't felt anything like that. I don't know if I ever felt anything of that type of emotion that was like on almost a daily basis. And so when you get that feeling, you want more of that. And so, I mean, it's really that's really what you're playing for, the opportunity to get into the World Series and playoff baseball is so much fun. I mean, it rises to another level. I mean, they're all playing hard during the year, but everyone takes it up a notch, and that's a lot of fun.
As much fun as it was, and I could certainly argue that September and the early part of October was as much fun as a Met fan maybe ever had. I'm okay. I think you guys would be too. I'm okay with less drama in September and the Mets just romping their way to a National League East or a playoff spot. We don't necessarily have to have game 161 with everything on the line. We don't need it. We don't necessarily need Francisco Lindor hitting a home run as we're being no-hit in Toronto. It's okay to just blow everyone away and make the postseason. So as much fun as that was, and it was intoxicating, Steve, I agree. I'm okay with a much more fun, business-like, casual playoff berth going into the postseason, and then let the craziness happen in the month of October.
As fun as that was, can you imagine what winning a World Series would be like?
Listen, that's the goal, right? I mean, just those celebrations when you're amongst the players and the joy that they have in moving along and succeeding, going to the next round. And that's what they're playing for. And be a part of that is a unique experience.
I can't imagine it, by the way. Maybe it's because I've never seen it with any of the teams I root for. Imagining the New York Mets win a World Series, can't do it. Can't do it. Can't happen. It's why in 2015 when they played Kansas City, I was on the radio saying the Royals are winning the World Series. I don't even know if it was baseball-wise. I mean, a part of it was, but the other part was I can't picture the Mets winning the World Series. So when that question is asked to Steve Cohen, I hope I'm on this earth to see it. I hope we're all doing a Rico at the parade. But, man, it's very tough to imagine.
You mentioned that feeling during October. Is there a moment this winter where the buzz wore off for you a little bit after you guys were eliminated?
Yeah, when I developed a frozen shoulder. I'm in pain every freaking night. It takes the buzz off pretty quick.
Was there any sort of
but actually, the way I would describe it is when it gets into the dead of winter and you're not playing baseball and you've just gone through something like that, you're like, you can't wait till the season starts again.
This reminds me of 1999. I said that at the time, but I'll tell you the other reason it reminds me of 1999. I would, during the offseason, just replay moments from that season. And I don't think we had YouTube on at the time, so I'm trying to remember how I was even able to do it. But I would have clips. I don't even know how I did that. I guess the internet. Like, the internet was still a thing in 1999, 2000. So I guess I went to www.mlb.com or keyword MLB on AOL or whatever it was. And I would listen to Gary Cohen's calls of the Robin Ventura Grand Slam single, of the Todd Pratt home run against Arizona, of, Al Leiter completing the complete game in Cincinnati. And it hyped me up so much. I've been doing it this year with some of these moments, because some of these moments, and we've done off-season Ricos analyzing them. We counted down the greatest home runs in the history of the Mets and where these home runs fall. But that's how I've gotten through the winter, getting pumped up for this baseball season, reliving some of those incredible moments from this past year. Here it is, the final question and answer from Met owner Steve Cohen.
How eager were you to get the season off again?
Yeah, I'm excited. I mean, come on. There's nothing better than coming to spring training and you have all the hope that this year is going to be a great year, and you haven't lost a game yet, so I mean you can hope, right? And I think there's more than hope here. I think we've built a pretty strong team.
There are huge expectations, no doubt about it. There's Steve Cohen, but I want to play two other clips, bonus clips, if you will, just to expound on the attendance issue. I made this point on the air on WFN, and I really mean this. I feel like Steve Cohen, and you may not like this. I understand a lot of people in the audience aren't going to like this, but I'm being honest at what I'm hearing from Steve Cohen. I think he's telling Met fans, if you don't show up, because remember, I'm spending money out of my own pocket. If you don't show up, I'm not sure I'm going to spend my own money at this rate. Doesn't mean he's ever going to become a small market team or become the Wilpons. Not suggesting that. But we heard a lot in these answers at his press conference on Tuesday. Heard a lot of Steve Cohen talking about payroll and spending more than he intended, and he's able to, and he doesn't like the tax, but he does it because he really wants to win. I want to play two answers he gave in an interview he did with the great Howie Rose on the Meet at the Apple podcast, because Steve Cohen, even before being asked about attendance, brought it up himself. Listen to him challenge Met fans when it comes to attendance when he made that appearance with Howie Rose. This was recorded just a few days before he did this press conference.
I'm sort of looking at 2025 as an important year for the fans. I mean, I've, committed and highly committed to putting the best product on the field. I was a little disappointed in the attendance last year, given the quality of the team. And I'm hoping that the fans come out this year, because I just think it's a blast there. And I think I think they'll have a phenomenal time with a team that I'm excited by.
Think about the way that started. Basically, I'm challenging the fans. I spent my own money on the team. Where the hell are you? And so the way I took that, and this was before he ever did the press conference. It's funny. I was talking to our crew on Evan and Tiki. I was going to open with Met attendance. I'm not even kidding you. A day before Steve had this press conference, because of that comment that he made in that interview that aired a day earlier. I heard him say that, and I was like, holy crap, he's challenging us. He's basically saying, hey, Met fans, you want me to spend? Show up. I'm spending out of my own pocket. And we never got to it that day. Decided not to open with it. And then he does a press conference, and he basically repeats the same thing. I don't even think he was as hard-edged in his press conference with those clips we just played as compared to that. He says, I'm challenging the fans. And then you hear the pause. You hear the way he's telling us, you better come. You don't come, I'm not going to spend. Now, here's the problem. I understand why he says that, but I also understand the consumer whose response is, buddy, it is expensive to go to games, because we all take this personally. Like, I could sit here all day and tell you, well, the Yankees draw, so don't give me money. But I know there are individuals who listen to the Rico who love the New York Mets who cannot go to games. Maybe they don't live in the area. Maybe the commute is too far. So we personalize this in a way in which we get pissed off, like we're being attacked. It's not an attack on an individual. It's basically saying, I spent a lot of money. Where are you? So I'm not talking to you, Susie. I'm not talking to you, Bob. I just mean in general, if I'm spending all of my money, where are you guys at? And so I think that was a challenge from Steve Cohen. There's one other clip from that interview with Howie Rose where he says kind of his disappointment from that Washington series that he expressed in his press conference. Take a listen.
I've definitely seen an uplift, and I'm excited by that. And I just want it to be sustained, because I remember being in the ballpark. I think we were playing the Nationals right before the final series with against Philadelphia. And we're right in the middle of the pennant race. I think there were 18,000 people in attendance at Citi Field. And I was like, we're right in the middle of the pennant race. Where is everybody? And so I'm expecting that the fans will come out and really enjoy a great product this year.
We'll see. I think they will draw better, but then the ultimate question is, what's enough? Tim from New Jersey sent us that email at thericob@gmail.com. He writes, Evan, I've heard the discussion that Steve Cohen is expecting more fans in the seats in 2025. Well, I have two questions. Number one, what was the total attendance in 2024? And number two, what is the number you feel that would appease Uncle Steve? I don't know what the magic number is. Bottom line is the Mets finished 18th in attendance last year. And if you compare their attendance last year to their attendance really in their history, especially at Citi Field, you will see that it was not a good year. The Mets attendance overall, and the 1 year you kind of have to throw out is 2021, because even though fans were back in the stands, they were operating at a lower percentage. Just to give you perspective, the Mets averaged 28,757. That was 11th of 15th in the National League. 2.3 million. The last time they were lower than that number in a non-COVID season was 2018, in which they were coming off a 90-loss season, and they were at 2.24. The last time before that they were below the attendance of last year, you have to go back to 2014, and that was when the Mets were in their cycle of losing 5 consecutive losing seasons. So it was not good in terms of the history of Citi Field. What do I think that number needs to be for Steve to be happy? It's got to be higher. I would say they got to average about 32,000 people, which is what they did, by the way, in 2022 and 2021, coming out of the pandemic. The best year they ever had at Citi Field was the first year they were there. It's the only time they ever got to 3 million people at Citi Field. But the second highest number in the history of Citi Field, and I'm only including Citi because I think Shea Stadium is not a fair representation. When they would sell out a game at Shea, they could get to 55,000. When you sell out a game at Citi, it's 42,000. So it's not fair. Like, the sellout isn't going to drive up the attendance the way they would at Shea Stadium. So for the sake of this, I'm just giving you Citi Field numbers. The best year they ever drew outside of year number 1 at Citi Field was actually, believe it or not, 2016, which proves the point. They draw better the year after. But I do think this is a challenge to fans. Now, here's a guy who's about to challenge all of you, the Rico listeners. Are you ready? Evan Poff. I emailed you guys last year complaining about the attendance for the Doc Gooden ceremony. I flew in from Dallas just for that game, and I'm usually good for at least one New York trip a year with a handful on the road. I'm not in the position of telling people how to spend their money. I spend my disposable income following the Mets. That's what I do. However, if you claim to be a fan, and if you're listening to this, you're obviously a diehard, or you just love the dulcet pipes of Evan Jefferson Aloysius Roberts. Oh, God, you're funny. Then there's really no excuse to catch the occasional game at Citi Field. I'm not suggesting everyone becomes season ticket holders, but you can't have it both ways as a Mets fan. You can't say the Wilpons were cheap, and that's why you didn't go, and then not go when we have a literal billionaire putting his money into the payroll. Uncle Steve did his part. I don't think it's too reasonable to ask our fellow Met fans to do ours. Look, man, it's a case-by-case basis. You can't tell people how to spend their money. You can. And I also completely understand. I use my dad as an example. So my dad went to every game. He got me into this. He got me as crazy as I am today. And slowly but surely, as he's gotten older and he lives further away, he goes to fewer games. And a part of why he goes to fewer games isn't even the money, right? Because I'm paying for the tickets now. I'm giving him back for all the games he bought. You know why he doesn't go to games? It's a pain in the ass. Literally, it is a pain in the ass for where he lives to come to a game. It's a pain to take the train down here. It's a pain to go in the building. I don't mean to put my dad on blast. He's older. It's a pain in the ass to walk up the stairs. It's a pain in the ass to go down the stairs. And watching the game at home is a very convenient thing to do. My dad is not lesser of a fan. So that's why I appreciate that email. I cannot tell anybody to show up. But what I can say is, and this is where I guess I'm in the middle on this, I understand why Steve Cohen, who is not spending the revenue on players, he's not the Dodgers or the Yankees. He's literally spending his own money. I get why he's saying, hey, if you want me to spend my own money, please show up. I get it. I do. I understand. But I cannot tell anybody, whether it's about money or inconvenience, that they have to go to games. Because it's in 2025, it is kind of nice to be on your couch, on your fat ass, watching the game, not having to worry about traffic. Like, I love going to games. I still go to a decent amount of games, but I don't go to as many games as I used to. I used to go to 70 games a year. I can't do that with wife and kids. And also, I admit, there are some nights in which it's just good to go home and watch the game on a DVR.
Here's the thing, though, right? And this is what I always complained about when the Wilpons on the team. It's what the one word that Steve Cohen said over and over and over is sustained success. But that also will increase the sustained success of attendance. It's you have a fan base right now. The diehard Mets fans are diehard Mets fans. They're here. You need to create new fans. How do you create new fans? Create a winning atmosphere. It's not about the current and old Met fans. It's actually about creating more new Met fans.
I agree. I think that's how the Yankees pack the building. I think it's you got a lot of casuals that go there. A lot of casual fans who say, hey, that's the place to be. And I think the more the Mets win, the more the Mets are able to do that. I would say this to a Met fan. If you want to go to a game, it's a fun time, go to a game. Don't feel pressured or bullied to do it. It will not be your fault if the Mets attendance is not that good. And Steve Cohen says, screw it, I'm not spending anymore. But he did talk about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. And I'll give you this tease because coming up, and we will post this Rico Brogna on Friday night. So if you've got plans, I'm sure you could just lock it in onto YouTube. But we're going to do a podcast Friday night in which we're going to talk all about the offseason of 2026. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to get it out of our system. I understand on WFAN it's different. On Twitter it's different. On the Rico Brogna, I do not want to spend time talking about next season. We didn't do it this season. We didn't break down Juan Soto throughout 2024. We talked about the season. So I think it's important to get it out of our system. We will talk about the guys who are free agents. We will talk about the guys who may leave the Mets. We'll talk about the guys who we should target and certainly realistic payroll options. So coming up on the Rico Brogna that will be posted at some point Friday night, you can consume it live on YouTube or you can just download the podcast wherever you download your podcasts. We will get into 2026, and I promise you it will open with a discussion on Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and why I do not believe he makes sense for the New York Mets. So I'll give you that as we get set for the rest of the week. We do appreciate you listening, subscribing, hanging out with us on Rico Brogna. You could always email us, thericob@gmail.com, thericob@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening to Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.